Ball's in your court now, Dream Theater. I need to start this review with a bit of a clarification. You see, I've been telling everyone who cares to listen over the last couple weeks that former Periphery bass player Adam "Nolly" Getgood was the producer of this new Haken album, Vector. Fact is, he did not produce this record. Adam "Nolly" Getgood did not produce Vector. He merely mixed and engineered the record. Basically, there is a distinction. There is a distinction. A producer usually has a bit of a heavier-handed effect on the creative process of making a record. All Adam "Nolly" did was put a bunch of microphones in front of a bunch of speakers, captured a great performance, and made the final product sound good. And how? And so, here we are with Vector, the new album from Haken, and it's fine. It's incredible. It's a little bit different from their previous album, Affinity, which definitely took more of an 80s nostalgia approach, definitely a little bit more retro-futuristic kind of aesthetic to it. I mean, you can see from the album art that they were really going for that sort of 80s computer game kind of aesthetic. But Vector is definitely more modern. Probably owing a little bit to the mixing and engineering style of Nolly. The band, of course, being self-producers on this record, had the ultimate say in the creative process of writing it, so it might just be that Haken are starting to finally get a little bit more self-aware of the prog metal scene around them. You see, Haken are kind of this band that exists sort of at the crossroads of classic prog metal and the newer sort of extended range guitar gent paradigm. And they've always kind of leaned more towards the classic prog metal sound, and I think this is the first album where they're really honing in and focusing on that more modern, tight, down-tuned metal approach. And as you can tell from just the first couple songs, Puzzle Box and The Good Doctor, there's a lot of that low-tuned 7 and 8 string guitar riffing going on. There aren't very many softer moments on this record, which is kind of weird for Haken, because they're usually known for their more serene kind of moments, but those are few and far between on this record. We really only get 2 or 3 of them. There's a section in the song Veil, which is the only longer track on the record, clocking in around 12 and a half minutes. And then there's, of course, the song Host, which is mostly kind of a ballad. I compared this song in my print review, which is going up on Ultimate Guitar soon, to Deftones' Phantom Bride, which is an absolutely amazing song if you haven't checked it out, but it kind of has that same feel where it's mostly a very soft song in the beginning and doesn't really build up to a climax until almost the end, but it's this really huge climax. Then there's a bit of a softer section in the final track, A Cell Divides, with probably the most traditional Haken-sounding bit, although I'd say that the song is actually quite comparable to the works of Leprous, who they will be performing with on this upcoming North American tour, which I'm seeing in a couple days. So this is a shorter album from Haken. It clocks in around 45 minutes in total, which is actually not that much longer than their only EP, Restoration, which is about 10 minutes shorter. And I feel like there's a lot of people who are going to criticize the record for this, who are going to say it's way too short for a prog metal record. I would tend to disagree. I think this album is actually the perfect length. It gets across the ideas that Haken are trying to put forward without overstaying its welcome. It doesn't make you go, oh my god, I have to listen to another 10 minutes of this. It's not the slog that Coheed and Cambria's newest record is. It's just long enough that it qualifies as a full-fledged album, but just short enough to leave you wanting more. And to that end, I think that I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. Full disclosure. This is a better album than anything Dream Theater has put out in a long time. Long time. And I'm even including some Dream Theater albums I really like Systematic Chaos. This is probably the best thing in prog metal since 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. Here's the thing. Haken are better players than Dream Theater. I mean, they do more interesting musical stuff. I mean, I've never heard Hakening in a Dream Theater song. They tend to take a little bit more of that classical approach than Dream Theater, which is way more in the sort of the jazz fusion end of things. They're better than Dream Theater in that respect. They're better songwriters than Dream Theater. Dream Theater have kind of become this very plodding band. They kind of write the same 3 songs over and over again and interchange the parts so that you can't tell. Haken have a much more interesting songwriting approach than Dream Theater. I can tolerate their vocalist more than James LaBrie. I mean, I love Dream Theater. James LaBrie he's a good singer for what he does, but I've already seen Haken live once, and Ross was spot on. And here's the thing, okay? Like, Dream Theater's best works are absolutely behind them. They're never going to put out a record of the same caliber as Scenes from a Memory or Images and Words ever again. We are never going to see Dream Theater outperform themselves. Haken, on the other hand, are still giving off this impression of a band whose best work is still ahead of them. They still have more good to put out in front of them. So, for that reason, I think at this point I'm considering Haken. I am crowning Haken the new kings of prog metal. Are there any criticisms of the new Haken album? Not really. I mean, there are a couple things that almost kind of turned me off a little bit at the beginning. The length, for one. I mean, I could listen to 3 hours of Vector, no problem, but I think that the album is the perfect length. If it were any longer, I might start to get a little... especially because the sound of the album is so tightly focused. They went for a darker, more minor key, more, dare I say, threatening sound. If they had pushed the length of it a little longer, it might start to drag on a bit. They just cut it off at the right point. That right, like, ooh, it just ended, I want more of this. One of the things that I did notice on this record that was a little weird is the lack of guitar solos. I mean, there are guitar solos on the record, particularly in the track Veil, where I think there's like 3 or 4 of them. But kind of like Periphery 3 Select Difficulty album, they really kind of cut back on the lead guitar shred moments in favor of the big in-your-face guitar riff moments. And I mean, these guys are channeling artists like Fear Factory on tracks like Nil by Mouth, which, I mean, the opening of that is Demanufacture. But these guys have already proven themselves to be quite shred-worthy. I don't think they need to really fill their record with mind-numbing shred moments. And that said, Diego, the keyboardist, still has quite a few tricks up his sleeve. At many of the points in this album where the sound could get a little bit too serious and dour, his keyboard playing usually comes in and saves the day and adds that vital element of humor and hubris that we expect from Haken. And it's really Diego's album when you put it that way. It is a heavier record for the guitar players, but they tend to sit back in the mix and let Diego be the one who goes nuts over the songs. So overall, I think this is probably one of Haken's strongest albums to date. I mean, it's not as divisive as Affinity was. I really like Affinity, but there are a lot of fans that don't. The lyrical concept is great too. I love that whole sort of psychological thriller kind of thing, the whole the doctor who has a bit of a sinister interest in a patient kind of thing. I'm not really one to pay much attention to lyrics, but I do appreciate a good sinister concept album when I hear one, so these guys nailed that aspect as well. Overall, this record is great. Probably the most overall focused and tight Haken record to date. To put it in a kind of an interesting way, a friend and I are going to see their concert this coming Wednesday in Toronto, and before we heard the record, we were worried that the band would focus too much on new material. Now we're excited that the band might focus on new material, so I think that tells you what we're really thinking of this record. Now, in my ultimate guitar review, I gave this record a 9 out of 10, only because I believe a 10 out of 10 must be earned. But this album comes about as close as I've ever seen a record get to 10 out of 10 right out of the gate. If I had to rate this out of 10, it's like a 9.8. It is great. It is probably the best prog metal album to come out this year. Mark my words on that. It is absolutely going to be in my top 10 albums of the year list. Anyway, thank you for watching.